Good morning, Dog Nation, and Merry Christmas to all of you. My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And this is one of those great weeks where, you get a chance to enjoy some Christmas. You kind of roll right into the Sugar Bowl after that. Man, we are excited about it all. We are happy to have all of you with us. Hopefully you're getting ready for a great time of family and friends and food and presents, and they say it's better to give than receive, so maybe you're getting a chance to give to a lot of folks here too this time of year. Hopefully you're getting ready for all of that. We're just thrilled about it all. Obviously the first round of the playoff, we were talking about this before the show began today, not outstanding. I was pretty disappointed, to be honest with you. Do have plenty of thoughts about that. We now know who Georgia's playing. We're probably not surprised by that necessarily. So let's just cover all those bases here for a little bit. Jon Stinchcomb today. I am getting slightly more confident in Georgia for reasons that we'll kind of get into here in a little bit. So we're going to cover all of that. We're going to have a good time. It's going to be a really good show. We're really looking forward to it. Also, we have a little bit of an update on our schedule for the rest of the week. I think I mentioned something on Friday. We're going to pivot off of that just a bit. I'll tell you more about it here coming up in just a little bit. Garrison Tucker says, what first-round game outcome were you most surprised by? Well, not to toot our own horns, but we have been good at making our picks here this season. We were 3-1 against the spread with our picks on Saturday. The only one we got wrong was, I said to you on Friday, and we're going to talk more about this, the first person in America talking about Ohio State was us. I don't take pleasure in that because I don't like the Buckeyes, and I don't like, coming off as immodest. But I told you on Friday, and this was a very contrarian take at the time, that I thought that Georgia, if it advances to play for the national championship, will be playing Ohio State. That opinion looks far more cogent now than it perhaps did at the time. But even with that said, while Ohio State was our pick to win and our pick to advance through that half of the bracket, I did think that Tennessee would put up a much greater fight on Saturday night than it did. I was pretty disappointed in that. And frankly, the whole thing was just such a flop. Indiana and SMU, I didn't really expect those teams to be competitive, and they weren't. Tennessee, I thought, would compete hard and eventually lose, and they didn't even really, put up all that much of a fight. So I would say that Tennessee is the greatest disappointment there. Steve Waters says, go Dogs, defense will win the day. Steve, I believe you're also coming off of surgery recently, so hopefully that's going well for you. UGA Marine pointing out that, a lot of the Notre Dame offense against Indiana did sort of come on that one big run to begin the game. And I think that's true. I think that's probably true. Thomas T-Bone 86 mentioning the Falcons. I will tell you this. Our buddy Jonathan from Dr. Pepper, kind enough to give my son and me tickets to go to the Falcons game yesterday. So we were there for the debut of Michael Penix. And it's kind of funny. I was joking with our producer, Jay Black, before the show started. I'm not the biggest NFL fan. I don't even pretend to be. But obviously we had a little bit of a lull in the Georgia schedule this weekend. So you go to the Falcons game, you kind of get into that a little bit. And, so much so that I watched the Sunday night game last night between Tampa and Dallas, or at least I had it on until I fell asleep. Lo and behold, Dallas wins that. So now Atlanta is sort of back in control of its, fate for the division, which is kind of fun. Big game coming up in prime time next week against, Jane Daniels in Washington. So got kind of a little fun run here at the end of the season for the Falcons. So, yeah, Thomas, I am into that a little bit. I am into that indeed. Let's say hello to folks at YouTube here for a moment, too, before we get ready to rock and roll on the show today. Spencer Clark says he respects Nico. He never quit. And I'm kind of the same way, I guess. Although I do have to admit this, and I'm not trying to be snarky. This is not me being like the sort of petty, trollish version of myself. I'm really trying to be objectively honest here. I'm amazed at how kind everyone seems to grade the Nico Iamaleava era so far at Tennessee. This is not his freshman season. This is year 2 for Nico. He didn't play very much last year. This was his year to be the starter. And we're led to believe he came to Tennessee for like $8 gazillion in NIL money. Next year, he's a junior. We're going to blink our eyes, and if we're not careful, the Nico era is going to be over with. Now, maybe next year, this is the best quarterback in the SEC. Perhaps that's the case. But y'all, there are a lot of quarterbacks vying to be the best quarterback in the SEC. Like, for instance, do you think that Nico Iamaleava right now is better than Lenora Sellers is for South Carolina? I don't believe that I do. Do you think that Nico is set up for more success next year than Arch Manning probably will be if he's the starter for Texas? We don't know that. We haven't seen much of Manning. One of the few plays he did come in on for the game against Clemson on Saturday was a fumble. So it's not like, Arch Manning's a guaranteed surefire hit either. But, keep in mind when it comes to big, sort of breakthrough seasons, Tennessee fans hoping for that for Nico. I mean, Texas fans are thinking the same thing about Arch. In other words, there are a lot of people sort of thinking this in the SEC here right now. I guess the point that I'm getting to is, once again, this is not me trying to be like a Georgia fan, Tennessee hater. I'm trying to be as objectively honest as I'm capable of being. That I think Tennessee had a lot going for it this year. They had a very good defense. I think they had a pretty good offensive line. Obviously, Sampson, the running back, was a really good season. They didn't get much from him in the game on Saturday. That was a big issue for them. But Nico, to me, is just sort of there. A good runner, not a very accomplished thrower, and frankly, at times on Saturday, not even really looking to throw very much. I'm a little bit surprised that 2 years into the Iamaleava era at Tennessee, Vols don't have more to show for this than they do. Nico is not the reason they made this year's playoff. Now, he didn't prevent them from making it, so I guess from that standpoint, you give him credit. But this is supposed to be a game-changing quarterback. It just seems like we're 2 years into that, and it hasn't really been that yet. Eddie from Ackworth, we love him, checking in to say good morning and Merry Christmas. Hope Georgia shows up at the Sugar Bowl shirtless pregame. Obviously, that was the issue for Tennessee, where they kind of come out there with no shirts on. The other thing that kind of let me know that, hey, maybe things are not great for the Vols was I thought that Josh Heupel seemed way too fired up before the game. When they arrived at the stadium, kind of running over to sort of do the high fives with the Tennessee fans who were there. Kirby Smart would never. Now, he does the rope line and the handshakes with the fans before home games, but, man, that is a stone-faced cadence from him prior to these road games. There is a big game vibe that Georgia gives off coming off the bus in one of these big sort of like, away-from-home playoff games. And I thought, I thought that Tennessee gave off a weird vibe before that game started, to be completely honest with you. All right, it's 10 a.m. We got to start. We'll do more comments. We'll roll into a fun day, getting ready for a great week. We do get some news from Kirby today. I'm excited about that. So let's just tell you all about it here. It's going to be a great time. Let's get it ready to rock and roll and get it going. Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We wish Merry Christmas to all of you, getting ready for a great week. College football playoff round 1 this weekend. A little bit of a dud, we would say, but we did learn something. We now know who Georgia's going to play. We're going to talk more about that here coming up in just a moment. Jon Stinchcomb also stops by. He is a part of this here today. A lot of thoughts from us on how Georgia gets ready for all of this here coming up on January 1st. Obviously, today is also an interesting day, too, because we'll hear from Kirby Smart before we're done with the day. Not done with the show, but done with the day. The point is, there's a little bit of like an interesting blend this week. You've got kind of giving way to Christmas next couple of days, but Georgia's prep for the Sugar Bowl kind of happens concurrent to that. So we're going to do our best to sort of celebrate and enjoy the holiday while also keep our eye towards that trip to New Orleans later on at the end of the week. So you can judge us. You can see how we do. We're going to try to have a good time. Jon Stinchcomb's a part of this as well. In a really, really festive holiday spirit here, getting ready for kind of a fun run through the rest of 2024 and what could be an incredible start to the month of January. So let's get ready to lock in and get it going. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We know a lot more now than we did the last time we spoke on this show on Friday. For instance, we now know who Georgia's going to play in its first playoff game, the quarterfinal matchup in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans on New Year's Day. It will be the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, this is not a huge surprise. I don't know that I heard all that many people on our show, commenters, people who interact with us on social media. I don't know that I heard very many people say they thought Indiana would beat Notre Dame. So the fact that it will be the Fighting Irish there in New Orleans, I think is kind of the expectation that most folks had. Now, let's also say this. There's a cool historic callback. Obviously, we all remember. We don't remember. We're all aware of. Let's say it like that. We were all aware of the fact that Georgia's national championship in 1980 came at the conclusion of a season in which it beat Notre Dame in New Orleans. So to have kind of a big sort of high-stakes game back in the same venue, same bowl game against the same opponent, that's sort of cool, right? I think we can all kind of understand that. And as we look ahead to what the Sugar Bowl is going to be like, I think there are two pretty big questions that sort of hang over this game right now. And I want to kind of address both of those in some form or fashion over the course of the next few minutes. Here's the question number one. In college football in 2024, how much have things changed? We're led to believe that things have changed a pretty good bit. For instance, we have seen for a lot of, especially the back half of the college football playoff era, the 14 playoff era, there was a lot of dominance kind of hoarded by a very small number of teams. Think about Alabama. You'd put Georgia in that category. Maybe for a while it's Clemson. It's been a little bit Ohio State, although they probably haven't won as many national championships as that talent level would suggest they should have. But a small number of teams have sort of owned the most success, and a lot of that has had sort of an SEC flavor to it. One of the reasons people have been excited about this new era, not necessarily us necessarily, but others, they like the transfer portal, the NIL, and the expanded playoff and all the craziness of that because it seems like it's going to give more teams a chance to be successful. And the other early returns suggest maybe that is true. We see a little bit more dispersion in where some recruits are going. Certainly we see a dispersion in where transfers are going. We see a more balanced level of play in the sport we've seen before. On the one hand, there is some evidence that suggests that maybe the sport is a little different than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. And so a question like that is incredibly relevant for the upcoming Sugar Bowl because the sport conducted the way that it was a few years ago. Let's just say it out loud. Notre Dame couldn't keep it within 4 touchdowns of Georgia. That Georgia would absolutely obliterate Notre Dame because that's what a team at the top of the SEC would do to a team like Notre Dame that has all kinds of pageantry and a very large following and plenty of sort of financial resources, but just not the same level of player. Not a bad recruiting program, top 10, top 15 almost every year, but not the same kind of NFL factor that a place like Georgia was. That Georgia versus Notre Dame kind of played within the sort of 4-team playoff era like this would likely be a blowout, the same way Alabama once blew out Notre Dame and Clemson once blew them out in the playoff, that Notre Dame just didn't belong in the same field as teams like this in the sort of 4-team college football playoff era. But this, we would think, is a different era now for the sport. And so as you look ahead to the Sugar Bowl, what's about to take place, you're left to wonder, okay, well, how much has it changed really? Now, as we go into the game, here's the one thing that I can tell you, is that Kirby Smart's going to be sort of on guard for everything. I'm reminded of there was a press conference prior to the SEC championship where one of the Texas writers asked Kirby, are you worried about, and I forget what it was, the Texas running game, whatever else, are you worried about that Texas running game? And Kirby's response was to the guy, basically an out-of-town writer, he said something to the effect of, well, you don't maybe know me very well. I'm paraphrasing. You maybe don't know me very well, but you should know I'm worried about everything all the time. And we obviously understand from the case of Kirby Smart that he is going to be worried about everything all the time. He's always going to have concerns that maybe Notre Dame is better, that we've been sort of led to believe, whether it be a couple times in the college football playoff or the BCS title game in 2012 or sort of any other instance when Notre Dame's had a chance to play on a big stage, they've just sort of proven themselves to be unworthy of that moment. And it's all sort of seemed like some sort of grand exaggeration to satisfy a very big fan base that kind of lives in parts of the country where college football otherwise isn't very big. There's a real motivation and an incentive to sort of give them an entrance point to college football. Notre Dame is sort of supposed to be that. And so therefore it would stand to reason that Notre Dame might be hyped up sometimes more than they deserve. Is this another one of those instances? We don't know, but Kirby Smart's going to be on guard, we would be led to believe, for anything. In fact, Kirby Smart going into this seemingly does have one, as he said it, pretty big worry about the game against the Fighting Irish. I'll tell you what it is coming up in a moment. Let me first of all, though, tell you what it isn't. A lot of folks were noticing on social media this weekend, some guy, and I guess is this CBS Sports Network? I don't know the guy's name, and I apologize for not, but there was a lot of attention being paid to some talking head dude on there who wants his big moment, man. He wants his 15 minutes of fame. He's going to sit there at the desk, and he's going to let you know the fact that the old ways are over. Georgia and the SEC dominating the college football playoff, dominating Notre Dame. Some dude from, I think it's CBS Sports Network, some guy from CBS is here to tell you it ain't going to be that way anymore. This is going to be a very, very different scenario here. So just for fun, let me give this to you. We said before, Kirby Smart's got some worry and some concern about the game coming up against Notre Dame, but it isn't whatever this guy thinks it is. This is from CBS Sports Network. Take a listen to this.
I'm going to just say the quiet part out loud.
Say it.
I don't care if they had Carson Beck. Notre Dame is going to beat Georgia.
Okay,
Notre Dame is great on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They can run the football. They can shut down your passing game. And we saw Beck in that passing game struggle because Georgia's receivers are not the usual suspects at Georgia that we used to see. So this matchup is a bad one for Georgia. I don't care if Gunnar Stockton's out there, Carson Beck, Stetson Bennett with another year of eligibility.
Aaron Murray. Okay. Matt Stafford. What
doesn't
about
matter.
Matt Stafford?
Buck Blue,
Okay.
anybody. Line them up. They don't have the receivers. They just don't match up well versus Notre Dame. And I like that Notre Dame comes in playing the way they are playing now because they're coming in because Ryan touched on it perfectly. Everyone now is talking about, well, you should have put another SEC team in over Indiana. Notre Dame is sick of hearing all about that. They're going to go down there on a mission and show them why they are who they are.
That's obviously total nonsense, but let me tell you what I love. I love that Buck Bellew got a shout-out and all of that. Like of all the things, we're throwing it back to the 81 Sugar Bowl, so why not give a little shout-out to Buck Bellew? I love that Buck Bellew got a shout-out there. Otherwise, though, that's pretty nonsensical, and I don't think that Kirby Smart is on the same wavelength as that dude, no matter what. It almost reminds me of, remember like a few years ago, and you have to have been around for a while to remember this. This has been kind of somewhat early days of DawgNation Daily, early-ish days anyway. Georgia's about to play South Carolina, and Feinbaum brought on like the former South Carolina player who like guaranteed victory, and nobody had ever heard of the guy before. And listen, I love SEC football. I mean, not just Georgia, but the rest of the league too. And even I didn't really know who the guy was, but he's on the Feinbaum show basically guaranteeing Georgia was going to lose to South Carolina. It kind of became this big thing here for a moment. I think there's an element of this here too, where it's like, whoever said this, not very famous, so unfamous, I don't even know his name, but a little bit like that South Carolina guy, a little earlier, years before, if you can sort of spin that and turn it into something, maybe you do. Maybe listen, the Georgia players themselves don't know if this guy's famous or not. For all they know, this could be the most respected voice in college football. So you play this audio for them, maybe it sort of gets them fired up. I would say that at the very least what it does is that it gets Georgia fans in kind of a spot in which they're comfortable. Georgia fans like the idea of people on TV saying stuff like this. I think that's a familiar feeling for Georgia fans. So I think that kind of sets the right stage for them coming into a game on New Year's Day against the Fighting Irish. I don't think many of the rest of the folks in the media may take it as far as this dude did, but there will be some skepticism about Georgia just based on the way that Georgia's played this season at times. I think that's probably to be understood that there'll be some of that. But if Kirby's not worried about, CBS dude and what he might be saying, as we said before, it does appear that Kirby Smart does have at least one concern with the upcoming game against Notre Dame and what's going to happen in the Sugar Bowl on January 1st. Smart this weekend made an appearance on, what is it called, the SEC Nation or whatever that show is, prior to the SEC appearance in the playoff there on Saturday. Smart was on the SEC Network, folks, and at that time, he did express his one concern about Georgia going into the Sugar Bowl, and it sort of leads us to, I think, the other big question for this game coming up. This is Smart making an appearance on TV this weekend.
You worry as a coach about this layoff, and we've tried to define the threats of what the time off are. How is it a benefit and how is it a threat? And you got to be careful. I mean, I get to watch these teams play today and last night, and you wonder, is it an advantage, the layoff? Because we have gone a long time, I feel like, already without playing, and we still have more time to wait till we play.
I said a moment ago that Kirby Smart told some Texas reporter in one of those press conferences for the SEC championship, hey, what you need to know about me is I worry about everything. Like, isn't this the perfect example of that? Because we were told after the SEC championship, oh, thank goodness this team gets its rest. Greg Sankey sent them on the road all year long, and now they need to rest. And before the SEC championship, we were all worried about the fact that Georgia had not had rest. Now you got Kirby on TV worried about the layoff. Like, you obviously can't have it both ways. Either you need the rest or you don't. I say that half-kiddingly because I understand the point that Kirby's making here. But he would say right now, watching all these teams kind of get a chance to play and sort of be, once again, in an in-season type of cadence, that Georgia doesn't really have that. They're going to have a much longer layoff before they get ready to play in the Sugar Bowl, and Kirby Smart being the sort of coach who sort of worries about every angle, including sort of contradictory points of view, sort of worried about both things at the same time. Kirby Smart now says he's a little bit worried about the long layoff for Georgia. But to be serious about this here for a moment, this does bring us to the other big question I think that exists about the Sugar Bowl. You know, question number one is, hey, how much has college football changed? In the old sport a few years ago, a team like Georgia would just ransack Notre Dame because that's always what happens. But now, is the sport more level? Is the playing field more balanced? Is it easier for a team like Notre Dame to play it close with Georgia? Point spread suggests that it is. Does the on-field product actually demonstrate that? We'll find out here coming up. The other, though, big question here is, and I think this is a legitimate one worth asking, even if Kirby's sort of exaggerating his concern about the layoff. How helpful is the bye? The fact that Georgia and Arizona State and Oregon and Boise State, the fact that those four teams got the bye, how valuable is that really? Now, let me give you one thing to consider here for a moment. I think it's worth pointing out that Notre Dame, I'm talking about institutionally, not the team on the field, but the actual organization, Notre Dame perhaps doesn't think the bye is all that valuable. Did you know when the system was kind of put together to have the 12-team playoff and to award the 4 byes and have that go to the 4 highest-ranked conference champions? Do you know that Notre Dame and its athletic director at the time was a part of the committee that put this format together? And he willingly, on behalf of his institution, willingly agreed to a system that theoretically would penalize his program. Notre Dame was a part of the organization that decided these byes should only go to conference champions. We're not a conference champion. Therefore, we're not eligible for this. After all, Notre Dame does not play in a conference. They agreed to a system in which they couldn't get the bye. Now, just understanding that in college football, everybody sort of argues for what's in their own best interest, and everybody's sort of always kind of looking out for themselves. The fact that Notre Dame was okay with a system in which they couldn't get the bye would lead you to believe that institutionally they don't believe that the bye matters all that much. And I think in most cases that's probably going to prove to be true. For instance, the team that we told you to watch out for on Friday was Ohio State. Ohio State looked very, very good, as we predicted that they would. We said on Friday they'd play for the national championship. That seems like a pretty strong opinion here right now. So when you look ahead to the Rose Bowl, Ohio State, I believe, is a small favorite right now against Oregon, despite the fact that Oregon beat them earlier this season. So at least theoretically on paper, the fact that Oregon gets rest and Ohio State had to play, that's not scaring people off from choosing the Buckeyes. So the extra week, the extra rest, perhaps is not going to be a factor in some of these games. But I do truly, genuinely believe in the case of Georgia, it probably does matter. Is the value of the bye overstated and overrated in some cases? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. The better team is still going to win most of these games. But in the case of Georgia, because of what it was asked to do during the year, kind of an unprecedented grind against the schedule, the likes of which not only did nobody in the SEC play, nobody in the country played anything close to what Georgia played over the course of 12 regular season games, and the 13th SEC championship game against another high-level opponent, Texas for the second time. In the case of Georgia, the bye may matter more than it matters against, for other teams. And it may matter more for Georgia this year than perhaps it might in future years if this format sticks around here for a while. So Kirby Smart at one point in time was concerned about his team not having rest. Now he's concerned about his team having a little bit of rust. And as a coach, it makes sense that he'd be worried on both sides of that. But for me, let me cast my lot with the rest. I am glad that Georgia's getting the rest. I am glad that Georgia's taking a few weeks here. It seems like over the course of that time, they may be getting a little healthier. That's what the whispers coming out of practices would suggest. They are certainly getting a chance to put a game plan around Gunnar Stockton. More on that in a moment, by the way. So for every team in every situation, getting this much time off, maybe it's not always a good thing. And maybe for some of these teams, they do come out looking a little bit rusty. But for Georgia, their best chance to win a national championship, I believe, is because of the rest they're getting right now. And the version of Georgia that Notre Dame sees in the Sugar Bowl may be a far better one that's been put on display for much of the regular season. And if that happens, some dude on CBS or anybody else who's counting out Georgia, they may be proven very, very wrong. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Glad you are with us, no matter how you're getting to us, video, radio, podcast. So many great ways for you to be a part of our show. We're just glad that you're choosing to be with us however you get to, and hope you're getting ready for a great Christmas this week and all kinds of great fun stuff. And obviously looking ahead to the Sugar Bowl there too. And as you sit home here right now and you kind of enjoy that home during Christmas time, you may put the fire in the fireplace. It's cold right now, right? And so during Christmas, you want to feel as cozy as you can on the inside of your house. But if you're walking around and kind of doing whatever, you kind of have that draft sneaking through or something like that. What that may be a sign of is, especially if you have an older home, older windows, or maybe just, sometimes the builder grade of window is not quite the product that's sort of best for your home. It may be time for you to make the upgrade to a Pella window and get the great options that they provide in terms of the most comfortable feeling on the inside of your house. Here's the thing, too. If you have not investigated the Pella product or just sort of the window game in a good while, the technology that exists now is really amazing. Like the blinds that are contained inside the windows kind of creates a more spacious feeling for your home. It's really amazing all the ways in which I think that Pella is just at the forefront of kind of window technology and a window experience that's really unlike anything you're getting anywhere else, and a tremendous upgrade for your home. In other words, don't wait until your windows are broken, until the seals are messed up, until you got rain coming in. Don't wait until then to make a decision that's going to make your home more comfortable, better looking on the outside. That's what Pella's all about. So I want you to give them a call. 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. You can also find them online, PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Have a conversation with one of the Pella experts today about why 2025 is a great time for you to have a huge upgrade. Be a great homeowner and take great care of your home with Pella windows and doors. Plus, a few more days, take advantage of a great offer here. 10% off Pella project, plus for 3 weeks only. We're kind of running to the end of this time right now. A few days left to act on this. You can actually get no payments until 2027 if you take advantage of that here right now. I was just in the beautiful Pella showroom just down the road from us here in the Dunwoody area the other day. It was gorgeous. I love to see all the great stuff they're doing, and I love the idea of homeowners around our area making big-time upgrades, taking great care of their property here as we head towards the new year. So online, PellaGA.com/DawgNation, or give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. All right, we've got a very busy show. Jon Stinchcomb coming up. Eventually, we're also going to kind of sink our teeth into what we did see from the first round of the college football playoff. Obviously not great, right? I mean, I love college football. For whatever reason, this college football playoff just didn't feel like, I'm talking about the first round games, just didn't really feel like college football to me. We said going into the weekend, didn't think the vibe around the games was great. Now, the truth is, pretty good atmosphere, once the games begin, especially in South Bend and Columbus. Those are the two places that I thought really looked like they sort of had a good vibe going. But, the games themselves, not great. But I do think there's some important takeaways from the games. We'll get to that here coming up in a little bit. Also, before we're done, if you listen carefully, you'll kind of notice that over the course of our time here prior to the Sugar Bowl, I'm just sort of naturally going to get more confident about the game. I've told you before, I'm not 100% sure what version of Georgia we do get in the Sugar Bowl or in the college football playoff. But as we get closer to game, I think there's sort of a natural kind of arc and rhythm we all follow where you just get more excited about the game. I am very excited about it, especially now that we know that it's Notre Dame. Excited about the game, and sometimes excitement breeds confidence. And I would say that there's some of that going on with me. But there is also, and I want to tell you this before we're done today, there's also one pretty, I would say, specific, tangible reason that I'm feeling a little bit better about Georgia, a little bit more confident about Georgia than maybe I was just a few days ago. We'll give you that before we're done. But for now, and before we bring on Jon Stinchcomb, let's go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And I want to talk a little bit more about something that Kirby Smart said on Saturday when he was with the SEC Network. And by the way, as I speak to you here on this Monday, we will hear from Kirby today. So, by the time we're getting off the air here for our show live, Kirby's going to do a Sugar Bowl press conference today, and that means you'll get a chance to see it on the DawgNation YouTube page. We know Georgia's opponent. We've heard all kinds of reports about Carson Beck. There's all that stuff out there. We're going to get more from Kirby on that today. So today, even if you're in kind of a Christmas spirit here, today will be a pretty newsy day. Marcus Freeman will speak today, too. So there's going to be some new news coming out today. If you want official reports on whatever, maybe some sort of statement about the actual official status for Beck and Stockton and all that kind of stuff, Kirby's going to give you some of that today, so stay tuned for that. But we're obviously, very much, and have been this way, that Stockton is going to be the guy for the game against Notre Dame and perhaps the rest of the college football playoff, too, we would probably assume here. So I thought when Kirby was on the SEC Network, he was asked what I think is a pretty important question from Jordan Rogers on the set there, which is, hey, how do you get Gunner ready to play in this spot? And how much, I guess, new and interesting things can you do with this quarterback that you haven't seen in the game, but also your opponent hasn't seen either? Is there the element of surprise here, for instance, that Georgia can pull out with Stockton getting ready to make his first start? Kirby asked what I thought was a good question. This is the answer that Kirby gave.
How much different will this offense look with the time off, the chance to put things in place for Gunner Stockton that he feels comfortable with? How valuable has that been, and how different will this offense look?
Yeah, I think time will tell on that. We still have, 9 days to get ready and get prepared for that. And so time will tell. I know this. We've had some great work in spirited competition and tried to practice really fast and physical each day, and the guys have bought into that.
So we're not surprised they're practicing fast and physical. Obviously, Gunner Stockton's a physical-style quarterback, so therefore the notion that you're going to bow your back and play as physically as you can with Stockton, the quarterback, maybe there is a little extra juice around that. What about the first part of that, though? Rogers queried to Kirby of, you guys going to break out something new? You're going to do something different? You got some plans in place for how you can use the Gunner Stockton skill set? Well, obviously, Kirby's not going to give anything like that away, of course. But let's think here for a moment. Let's let our minds wander, our imagination here for a moment. I want to go back to the SEC championship. Kirby Smart made a very bold coaching decision during that game. The decision to fake a punt and extend a possession, which led to a field goal for Georgia, was a pretty bold stroke at the time, right? And as Kirby Smart explained it after the game, it was actually the presence of Stockton in at quarterback that gave him maybe the little extra motivation to kind of want to roll the dice there in that particular moment. So let's use this as a template for what the Sugar Bowl might provide. This is what Kirby Smart said about that decision and how Stockton's presence kind of influenced that. Let's go back to a couple of weeks ago.
I just felt like we were losing momentum, and we needed a spark. And that gave us one. And, you're playing with your backup quarterback. So you got to be willing to take some risk at that point and get some things going.
So let's think about this. Jordan Rogers says, hey, you going to do anything different with Gunner Stockton at quarterback? Kirby says only time will tell. But Smart at the SEC championship said, hey, because we have a backup quarterback, maybe we do need to roll the dice a little bit more, especially if we need to use the words that he used, if we need a change in momentum, if we need an extra spark. Maybe we do need to be a little bit more aggressive. Now, if that line of thought holds for the game against Notre Dame or anything that happens in the college football playoff after that, exactly what could that look like? What would that mean for this particular game plan? Is it trick plays? Is it throwing deep more regularly than some people might think? After all, Stockton's arm strength is probably underrated. I don't think that people realize that when you look at the overall skill set for Gunner, throwing it very, very deep with a very strong arm, there's probably more of that going on for Gunner than you realize. Is there a chance that's part of the overall repertoire here in a way that people assume that a quarterback making his first start might not exactly be? We don't necessarily know necessarily. But it is interesting that Kirby Smart sort of felt, well, because of a backup quarterback and because of some of these things, maybe we will roll the dice a little bit more. And in fact, let's investigate this a little bit further. Another statement from Smart in that post-game press conference after beating Texas, the thought process that existed for him to want to do from December on, is there a coach that's made a much more bold coaching decision during a game than that? Obviously, Smart, when it comes to fake punts in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, whether it be recognizing Ohio State's in 2022 or the failed fake punt against Alabama in 2018, some of that has kind of gone on for Georgia, but rarely has it ever worked out better than it did against Texas. Let's get more here for a moment on Smart's thought process on that after the game. Take a listen.
Yeah, I got some history of fake punts in that building, so it's one that went our way, and something we've worked on. We carry it, and it was great design by our staff, Kirk Benedict and Coach Hartley and those guys. And they do a lot of work on punt. We have a lot of formations on our punt, and the biggest risk was snapping it to Drew Bobo. He had to catch it and toss it, so he'll go down in history with a higher passing percentage than his father at 1 for 1. So he should be 1,000%. But I just really appreciate Arian. I thought Dom Lovett had made an incredible play on that play because he got a look that we had not seen, and he made a decision versus two guys holding him up to go. He did what we told him not to do, but he did it because he got a different look, and it freed Arian up. Smile Munden had a key block on that. Did we end up scoring on that drive or no? Oh, we got a field goal, yeah. So it gave us a field goal, gave us a little momentum, a little juice, and we had lost a little momentum at that point. I think that was after they scored the touchdown. And look, it's a lot easier to call it when you think you're going to be in the playoffs. Either way.
So once again, very honest from Kirby at the end there that they felt the freedom to roll the dice because, hey, we're going to be in the playoff no matter what. But the idea that they're even thinking that way, I think, suggests something kind of fun for the Sugar Bowl. In other words, with Gunnar Stockton making his first start, most of us would be led to believe, I would say that for me, I'd probably buy into conventional wisdom, that Georgia's overall game plan might be a little careful. They're looking at the running game involved. They may be looking at safe passes. They know they need to throw it, and perhaps even more than they threw it in the second half against Texas, but it'll be of the safe variety. But that fake punt also leads you to believe that maybe when they need to, they'll feel all the freedom in the world to roll the dice because taking a huge risk in a really key spot is one of the main reasons they beat Texas. If they did it before, just maybe they might be willing to do it again, too. Something to keep in mind. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. A great time this weekend. Our buddy Jonathan from Dr. Pepper invited my son and me to go to the Falcons game yesterday. We had a great time with Jonathan there on that. We're talking about the upcoming Sugar Bowl a good bit yesterday. Dr. Pepper will be a huge factor in New Orleans, as they always are. I'm loving these new Fansville commercials. They're always really funny. The one coming up for the, what do they call it, playoff you wear is what they're calling it. It's the one like big national campaign I never get tired of. I think the commercials are really well done. They're obviously written by people who love college football, and so I think some of that comes through. And I do love the delicious, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. My son and I yesterday had a good chance to drink a good bit of Dr. Pepper with our buddy Jonathan yesterday. So it's always a good time if you're watching football with Dr. Pepper. Yesterday we were. And you can be too for the upcoming Sugar Bowl, the rest of the college football playoff, or anything else beyond that, including a big part of your Christmas celebrations here coming up too. So wherever you're doing your shopping, your local Kroger, wherever else, just make sure you pick up the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. Because when it comes to Dr. Pepper, Christmas, and college football and everything else, it's a pepper thing. And, of course, we got some fun for you coming up before we're done. We'll get more into these playoff games. We just saw what it means for Georgia, what it means for the sport. Why were they such duds? We'll cover all of that. But for now, Dawgs getting ready for the Fighting Irish. Let's talk more about it with our buddy Jon Stinchcomb here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com Insider.
Let's say hello to Jon Stinchcomb here. We now know who Georgia's going to play. We probably thought this is always who Georgia was going to play, but nonetheless, the storyline writes itself, right, John? First of all, Merry Christmas to you. Great to see your home looking gorgeous as always. Rematch of a Sugar Bowl in 1981 that was sort of for all the marbles. This is a very high-stakes game in its own right. Big brands here. When you expand the college football playoff, these are the kinds of games you hope to be able to provide for people. And I just think that Georgia Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl feels very big. So let me sort of start there early thoughts on this matchup here. Two very recognizable brands about to do battle once again.
Yeah, I think it's one of the highlights of this time of year is you get some good games. Like round one was fun, but those games were pretty non-competitive. I think in this next round, there's two that look like they're going to be better than the other pair of games that remain, and that's Georgia and Notre Dame's one of them. You look at the opponents or the 8 teams that remain, and you go, that Ohio State-Oregon game looks like a pretty fun one. As does this Notre Dame-Georgia matchup. And Notre Dame has been impressive. They're one of the few teams, in my opinion, that had been at least tested at one time or another. And there's plenty of discussion that will need to be had following this tournament as to how you pick the 12, because there was not a lot of competitive football that was played this past weekend. I think that changes in this next round. Notre Dame, Georgia is going to be a hard-fought game. That Ohio State-Oregon game, I expect to be a hard-fought game. Probably not so much in the other two, but it's made for some fun fodder for all those that are interested to talk about these matchups and what's to come.
No, I think that's probably true. A couple of things I addressed with the audience before you got here. You know, in the sort of recent history of college football, we're led to believe that a team like Georgia is going to just completely obliterate a team like Notre Dame. Notre Dame has seemingly been overrated on the national stage over and over. But we're also reminded that in 2024, about to turn into 2025, the landscape of the sport feels a little bit different. It does seem more balanced than it has been in the past. Things seem to have the possibility of happening in a way we could more easily disregard them in the past. In other words, we're led to believe that the playing field is more balanced, it's more level. Does that create more of an opportunity for Notre Dame than would have existed if these two teams had played, you know, in 2021 or 2022 when Georgia clearly was way more dominant than almost any team in college football? Like, how much has the sport changed, and is Notre Dame a more of a threat to win this game than the average Georgia fan is going to probably give them credit for being?
I think it has eroded the advantage that programs get when they develop and build long-term. What it has allowed teams to do is have a reset that they can hit on an annual basis. That, you know, if you're not developing the skill at a certain position group, then you can just go and buy your way into relevance and fill your roster out that way. And this isn't an indictment of Notre Dame or any team specifically. It's the landscape of college football, where you look at it and you go, where are we weak and how can we change that? And it used to be, well, we've got to recruit better, we've got to develop better. That no longer is the case. You have another option on the table. And what we've seen is an ability for teams to go and specifically target players and position groups and change their rosters in meaningful ways. I still think that the teams that you see perennially at the top, Georgia being one of them, the most efficient way is through recruitment and development. I don't think that changes. I think there are ways to kind of create some shortcuts to that path, and we've seen teams try to utilize that pathway. But it's in these big games. It's the strength of schedule versus overall record conversation, where I think that the difference is really starting to hold true and bleed through, in that the teams that have established their identity, that have a culture, that have a deeper roster, which is hard to do in today's day and age, meaning that players that are talented are willing to be the number 2 guy, even sometimes the number 3 guy, and still be on a team that provides that depth that separates those that are elite and those that are pretty good. I think that's the difference that you see. And I think that's what's going to spell out over these next few games.
I think we also talked about this a little bit last week. Kirby Smart was in the SEC Network this weekend saying, boy, I'm worried about our team in the long layoff. This is after he had been worried about the team and not having enough rest. I mean, which is a classic coach. I'm not making fun of him. That's just what coaches do. They worry about both sides of the same coin. This is a perfect example of that. But let it be very, very clear from me right now. I want the rest. I'm glad they're getting the rest. If Georgia loses Notre Dame, it's not going to be, in my mind, because they waited so long without playing football. I really don't believe that. I believe that the bye is perhaps overrated for some teams in some situations. But if Georgia had to play this past weekend, I don't believe they're winning the national championship. I think eventually they would have just run out of gas and lost to somebody. I think Georgia's chance of winning the national championship was greatly aided by getting the bye. I don't think that's true for Arizona State. They're still going to lose to Texas. I don't think that's true for Boise State. They're still going to lose to Penn State. I don't think that's true for Oregon. As I said on Friday, think that Ohio State is going to beat Oregon too. I think we may see 3 round 1 winners also win in the quarterfinals too. But Georgia needed the rest, and I'm glad that it got it. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think you look at the situation and the season that Georgia has played and the amount of battles that they've had to go to and through, it far exceeds any team that is relevant at this point in the year. There are other teams that had rough schedules, but they're not still playing football, meaningful football in the college football playoffs. Georgia is. They needed the time off. They needed to recover. They need post-Beck time to get Gunner up to speed for everyone to understand what this offense is going to look like. Everyone that matters, the players and the coaches, to understand what are we going to feature, what are we going to go to, what our identity is going to be with a major shift from Carson Beck to Gunner Stockton, and be able to rep those things. I heard you talking about the fake punt. Well, given extra practices, there is great opportunity. Georgia's not alone in this, for you to rep some of those plays that otherwise you get just a handful of times throughout the season. Now that you've had added practices, those gadget plays, the trick plays, the one-offs where you might get one rep all season in a game for a particular play, whether it be a fake punt or offensive play call or onside kick, any of those things, you get more reps at it. And that's to Georgia's advantage, in addition to the fact that they were a beat-up team. It has been a long season for Georgia. There's a number of players that may still be played that have played in that Georgia Tech game, followed by the conference championship, and their bodies were feeling the wear and tear of a long season. And I can guarantee you they are grateful for this extra week to not have to prepare for an opponent that they played that was going to be hungry this past weekend. So they're grateful for that time off. And I'd much rather deal with the issues of quote unquote rust or not being sharp. Let's be honest, BA, we haven't been the quickest starting team in the country this year. So it's not like we've been coming out of the gate smoking to begin with. It's usually taken us a little while to get up to speed to begin with. So I'm all for the time off and the recovery.
So let me give you an opinion about something, and I'm kind of workshopping this take a little bit, so maybe I'll regret saying it after I do, but just hear me out on this for a moment. Kirby Smart said in the clip that you mentioned, but we played before you came on, hey, because we knew we were going to be in the playoff, it's easier to fake a punt. We had some comfort in taking risk because, we felt like we were sort of playing with house money, in a roundabout way. Is there a viewpoint that Georgia could sort of see the entire college ball playoff that way? And as I said before, maybe I'll say, no, I don't really stand by this take, but I'm going to give it to you for now, and we'll see if it makes sense. Georgia's won 2 national championships. Georgia's playing with its backup quarterback. They're barely favored to win this game. They're really not favored to win the national championship. Oregon's undefeated. They're the 1 seed. The pressure on Georgia in a playoff seemingly is about as low as it's ever been and as low as it ever will be. So given the choice of we've got a backup quarterback, we need to be careful with him, we need to not, put too much on him, or, hey, let's just go out there and let it rip, see what happens. Is there a viewpoint that because of the things that I mentioned before, that Georgia could approach the playoff as free and easy as they approached that fake punt against Texas? Because against Texas, they would have said, we know we're going to be in the playoffs. Let's go out and try to win the game. In this particular case, Georgia's won a couple of titles, so why not just roll the dice and see if you can do something that, I don't know, crazy that maybe increase your chance of winning, as opposed to feeling like because of pressure you have to play very carefully. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. I think every coach, one of the biggest asks of them is figuring out what's the right strings and levers to pull to get the very best out of your team. And I think there's probably not a more dangerous situation than a talented team that's highly motivated. And when you get the opportunity to be, quote unquote, the underdog, and you feel like you're the best team that remains, that's a scary proposition. And I think Georgia very well could find themselves in that situation of saying, they don't think enough of you. They don't show you the respect because, Gunnar Stockton's your backup quarterback, and, the Vegas line initially was not in your favor. So if that's a motivator for a talented, dangerous team, boy, is Coach Smart and his entire staff going to lean into that? You better believe it. I think it also lends itself some opportunity. Coach Smart doesn't need to defend the decisions he makes to the fan base or to the media. I think he's earned the ability to defend whatever position he might hold. And so if he wants to be more aggressive, if he's going to call a fake punt or go for it on 4th down or call a trick play when it's, maybe on your own side of the 50, he's earned those opportunities. Now, behind the scenes with his team, does that serve as a good motivator of, hey, we're going to leave all our cards on the table. We don't have to hold anything back. We've got to play our best. We've got to pick each other up. Yeah, those are all the right motivating tactics that any coach is looking for. You're trying to look for the right ways to push guys into focusing into those fast, hard practices that he's talking about. Those are hard to do when you're in week 38 of the season, or so it feels as a player. So you want these guys to be as focused, which is one of the biggest challenges, not only physical fatigue, but mental fatigue, the ability to focus on, the same fundamentals, that same film breakdown that you feel eager to do in the first quarter of the season. Those things start to droll on and drag on at this time of year. So any kind of motivator to get guys as focused and dialed in as you possibly can, I have no doubt that Coach Smart and the entire staff is going to lean into it.
I think that's really, really interesting, John. Let me finish with this, if you don't mind. Obviously, I come on the show, and whether I'm right or not, I give very loud opinions and try to be, I try to pretend that I know that I'm right, whether I actually am or not. But when it comes to playoff, I'm at a little bit of a loss because I would tell you that I'm pro CFP. I like the playoff more than the BCS. I like the 12-team playoff in theory more than the 4-team playoff. But I hated this weekend. And I don't know what you do about that because watching on Friday, I would have obviously said, and I did say this, well, Indiana doesn't belong to playoff, SMU doesn't belong to playoff, but then lo and behold, Tennessee got blown out too. So I don't know what you do because on a regular weekend, just some random Saturday in October, I can't get enough college football. But this weekend, I'm looking on the channel guide to see what else is on half the time because these games are just terrible, for the most part anyway. What do you do about that, John? I mean, it was a very strange weekend for a sporting event that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. Where does that leave us?
Well, I think you look at the stats from the start of the game to the finish of the game, because I'm sure the audiences that watched those first quarters were pretty high. And by the end of the game, you could do whatever you wanted, which was probably prepare for Christmas, and you're going to the Christmas parties and family and that kind of thing. But they were all stinkers. The shocker was that Tennessee game. What a disappointing performance. So you're looking for, conference representation. That's the third team in the most dominant conference in college football, and they got smoked. So just disappointing all the way around. Very rarely can I find myself rooting for the Tennessee Vols, but the one lone occasion that I have in the past however many years, and they still disappoint. So glad I'm not a Tennessee Vol ever. They stink, but man, what a disappointing representation of our conference. I think you look at it and you go, there is going to be change. There will be differences in the postseason as to what it looked like from this year and all future years. There's only so much they can do in 2025 coming up. But long term, I think there will continue to be some honing as to what qualifies a team. It's got to be more than wins and losses. The fact that Signetti is coming in and saying, before I take over a 3-win team, I already see 10 wins on my schedule.
Yes.
Is that part of the conversation? That is an indicator that, yes, you can improve. Yes, you are, quote unquote, Google me a winning coach, but that does not mean you are one of the top 12 teams just because you can win 11 games in a season. That's not good enough. So the conversation will change. The standards at which a team will have to meet before they can qualify to be one of the 12 deserving teams will change. And I think they also need to look at the fact that how a team gets that bye and the relevance and implications of participating in a conference championship. Because, as we said, if Georgia were to lose in the SEC, it wouldn't be that they've earned this opportunity for a bye. As a matter of fact, it would have been a penalty. They would have had to play that extra game, and the only quote-unquote benefit would have been it's double elimination. You'd have to lose 2 before they leave the tournament. But that still means they're looking at 17 games. Georgia would have had to play 17 games to win a national championship if they lost in that SEC championship. So there's still so much for them to do. And I don't know that you get away. I don't know that there will be 12 teams that can compete and have it be really good football, a full game worth of football moving forward. I still think if you were to have picked this year, if you were to pick 4 teams, I think there would be the same 4 that everyone's looking at heading in to this next round and that you expect to be heading into the semis.
Let me tell you what, and we'll finish with this. I want to be respectful of your time before Christmas. Let me tell you what concerns me a little bit is for the sport, and I'm very pro college football. I mean, I love college football. My whole life in some form of fashion sort of seems to revolve around college football. We've made some pretty big trade-offs for this. Like the SEC championship, which has always been my favorite sporting event, it is not what it once was. Kirby Smart even acknowledged that. And the reason why we sacrificed some of the prestige of the SEC championship was for this 12-team playoff. Well, based on this weekend, and it's a very small sample size, and I'm not condemning the 12-team playoff, but based on this weekend, trading the prestige of the SEC championship for this was not a good trade-off. And the stakes are high for the sport because I believe I'm right about this. Obviously, the NFL had games on Saturday. It was the Chiefs and Lamar Jackson. I'm not against each other, but both those teams were playing, right? These are like major TV, Jackson's an MVP level player. The Chiefs are sort of a traveling circus. These are major TV draws that the NFL is going to put on opposite these playoff games. So if these playoff games are duds, you're going to get buried. I have no idea what the TV ratings were, but just theoretically, if you're putting bad football up against the NFL, you're going to get stomped. And I'm assuming there probably was, some version of that. I'm guessing here that the sport's got to be really, really careful because we are sacrificing some good stuff because this is supposed to be the preeminent event. But honestly, it did not feel as enjoyable for me as like a random Saturday in October. You're going to be really, really careful mortgaging your future for this event if the event ends up being a dud.
BA, are you worried about cost benefit? Because that certainly hasn't been the concern for college football in these past 5 years.
Yeah.
We don't talk about the cost. All we're looking at is what it could be and the almighty dollar. So if we're gonna peel back the curtain, that's the decisions that have been made, whether it's NIL or transfer portal or obviously college football playoffs, the merger into still having bowl affiliations with a 12-game playoff series. All those things are money-driven. And very rarely is the total cost weighed. So, yeah, it was not great football. It was all double-digit 2-score wins across the board. And that's part of it. Now, I'm not sold on the fact that they'll come back and look at those numbers of viewership and say, maybe we should make changes based on that. I think it's still going to be profitable. I still think that folks tuned in at least to the first half to see something that was new, sparkly, and shiny. Does that mean there's no cost involved? Of course not. I think you look at history, you look at tradition, and we have torched so many different variations of that where people feel allegiances to series, where rivalries or games or conference championships. Our own coach is saying, I made decisions based on the fact that we could lose in this game, which means it doesn't hold that same weight that it did 365 days prior. And it probably has changed already. So cost benefit is very rarely part of the equation. I think you look at the decisions that are being made, the implications that they hold on the future of all of college football, and they're head scratchers. It's always, in my opinion, what's been short-term benefit or gain for individuals or small parties. And very rarely have we taken a bigger picture, what's the greater good approach. And it's going to be to the detriment of the sport. But, I feel like we're going at such fast breakneck pace across the board, the decisions that are being made, that I'm not sure there's any one singular person that's behind the curtain saying, hold up now, is this good for the sport? Is this good for the overall product that we're offering? Because there's plenty of cases and places where you can cite that say, this isn't it. This isn't good for the sport. This isn't good for fan engagement in the long term. It's all what's seemingly been short-term gain that's money-driven as to how they can pocket a few more dollars. But ultimately, you look at it and you're going, I'm not sure that this is a sustainable long-term plan that will keep fans engaged in a way that they feel the connections. I'm the first to say, BA, I don't feel the strong ties to a number of things, whether it's rivalries or games or candidly even some players, because it feels like it's more of a mercenary-based system that is all money-driven.
I hate to keep you long, but Jay Blake, our producer, gave me some numbers here overnight from the ratings. And listen, the average fan does not care about TV ratings, nor probably should they, but just to kind of further the point we're making. So according to John Oran, who's a famous sports business reporter, the playoff ratings on TV, Ohio State, Tennessee, 6.3 million, Indiana, Notre Dame, 5.7 million. The two games on TNT, SMU, Penn State got 3.1 million viewers. No, this is not. This is a 3.1 rating, not which for cable essentially does work out to be approximately millions. But it's basically the ratings point, not total millions. But for cable, it's basically the same thing. SMU, Penn State got a 3.1 rating. Clemson, Texas got a 3.6 rating. Those are pretty. I mean, based on my limited knowledge of sort of TV industry, those two games on TNT are pretty. I would say pretty horrendous ratings, and most people have TNT. It's not like they had to go searching for TNT necessarily. Got outdrawn by the NFL. We sort of knew that it would. Steelers, Ravens got 7.6. Texans, Chief got a 7.4. I mean, John, boy, that is not a great rating showing. Bad games, you would expect it. The games on TNT were essentially non-existent from a rating standpoint. For comparison here, the SEC championship between Georgia and Texas drew 16.6 million viewers. Georgia had a lot of games this year that rated higher than these games were rating here. That's pretty bad, right?
Yes, it is really bad. And it's because people weren't as inclined to watch football knowing that there's better games in the future or better games even available on a different channel. So, again, it's got to be part of that decision process. Now, if we're comparing apples to apples, we probably want to look at, what the Gasparilla Bowl would have been last year or what it would have been for other games that were outside of a 12-game series this time of year. So I'm sure those numbers will go up the closer we get to a national championship. But a little surprised to hear, you're in the threes for some of those games. But then when you zoom back out and you look at the teams that we're playing, and you're going, I think even the casual fan that may not know the overall landscape is going, these aren't closely matched teams. And if I flip through and they're already down by 14 by 10 minutes into the first quarter, which most of the games were already out of hand pretty quickly, then you're going, I can spend my time elsewhere.
Yeah. Jon, Merry Christmas to you. Thanks for your time here. Always appreciate that. Hope you have a great time with your family. Obviously getting ready for a really fun Sugar Bowl coming up after that. It's a great time of year, and so I hope that you are having a great time. I trust that you are. We'll look forward to talking to you very soon back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
Well, I appreciate it, B.A. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and Merry Christmas to all of DawgNation.
Indeed, that is the case.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me do a couple of things here before we kind of get ready to roll on. Housekeeping, if you don't mind. I meant to mention some of this kind of stuff earlier. So today is going to be the last sort of live show we do here until Friday. To be completely honest, on Friday's show this past Friday, I kind of gave a little bit of a different schedule. We've sort of rethought things here a little bit. Obviously, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, our tradition is we take those days off. We're going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to come in here on the 26th and do a show and then be kind of gone for the 27th. But the honest truth is, by the time you get to Friday, we're sort of into Sugar Bowl stuff, some sort of extra live stuff taking place, Mathens, things like that. So what we're going to do is, because my family and my wife in particular is going to expect me to be home a little bit for Christmas, we're going to take the 26th off, day after Christmas, and we're going to be just at it full go from the 27th, and from there all the way into New Orleans and all the way next week, sort of wall-to-wall coverage of everything that goes on. Now, some of that's going to have to be a little bit different because, for instance, Monday is going to be during Media Day. That's going to be a really fun show, but it'll be different than normal. So we're going to have a lot of that kind of taking place. But basically, we're here today as always. I think we have a really fun thing planned for Friday's show, which will be really cool. But Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and then the 26th, I'm going to take that as a day off to be with my family before we get rocking and rolling and getting ready for just a gigantic run through New Orleans and the Sugar Bowl and all the talk about how Georgia's going to go out there and hopefully get that win against Notre Dame. We're going to do all of that. Also, let me give you one more quick reminder here. There is still time for you to be a part of our DawgNation Invasion. Great travel experience coming up. Wonderful pregame tailgate. All of the really cool stuff going down with that. And we want you to be a part of it. It's going to be an awesome time. In fact, if you go to DawgNation.com/tailgate, you can secure your spot today while supplies last. That means a DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. That means a chance to hang out on the New Year's Eve party, the game day tailgate. You can also get some travel plans, including hotel stay if you'd like, a 2 or 3 night stay there at the Sheraton in the French Quarter, right in the heart of all the action in New Orleans. New Orleans is a great place to be on New Year's Eve, great place to be for a big game like this. It just does big events really, really well as a city. You're going to love it. So if you're kind of last minute here, you can still kind of make those plans and be a part of this DawgNation Invasion. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. Our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips makes this possible. Also, Academy Sports and Outdoors, Dr. Pepper, Kroger, and R.S. Andrews, all a very big part of that. So we can't wait to see you there for that. Let's also go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. Obviously, we got big things going on in April when it comes to our DawgNation cruise, and we want you to be a part of it. So if you come to our DawgNation Invasions, you love all that. You'll love our DawgNation cruise, too, because it's essentially the same fun, and we just have it for longer. We have it in gorgeous weather. It's cold right now. It makes me dream about the Caribbean. So you will love that. I want you to give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. She's a travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can get you booked up here on this great experience on board Utopia of the Seas for our DawgNation cruise. You can email her as well, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready to go on all of that, and you'll be glad that you did. So before we're done, I'm going to tell you why my confidence in Georgia against Notre Dame is starting to grow here a little bit. We'll give you that. And by the way, not just for Notre Dame, but for the entire college football playoff. We'll give you that in a minute. But for now, let me give you a couple of my own thoughts here, kind of cruise around the SEC style. on this college football playoff. Obviously, I've never shied away from the fact that, like, I am a very SEC-centric person. Now, Georgia's my favorite team. I don't like a lot of the other SEC teams, but I do like the SEC. It's just the brand of football that I enjoy. So when Indiana's getting kicked around on Friday or when SMU's getting kicked around on Saturday, my first thought is, well, if there were more SEC teams in this playoff, this would not be happening. This would be better. And then the Tennessee thing happens. And that becomes a way in which some people kind of fire back at the SEC. But let me give you this point just for a moment. Something to consider that maybe nobody else is pointing out here. That even with Tennessee getting blown out, to me it sort of still speaks to, if you want to call it like SEC supremacy or whatever else, it still sort of speaks to why the SEC brand of football is just better than the others. And, you know, some things are not easily explained, but they are obviously observed. And this is an example of this. That when SMU gets blown out by Penn State or Notre Dame blows at Indiana, that's boring. Like, Tennessee got beat by Ohio State worse than any of those teams did. And it was maybe bad for Tennessee, but it was not boring. And this is the thing that I keep coming back to. You know, everybody says that Alabama should not have been in the playoff because they lost to Oklahoma. The truth is, I'm glad Alabama missed the playoff too. But what you can't say is that when Alabama went to Norman and got beat so bad that night, you can't say that was boring. Like, that was one of the more fascinating games I watched all season long. It wasn't close, but the outcome seemed significant. The honest truth is, SMU and Indiana losing, it's just not significant. Nobody cares about Indiana or SMU. But by the time the game was over, the Indiana fans are already thinking about the Colts, and the SMU fans are already thinking about the Cowboys. Like, there isn't anybody anywhere in this country who had a conversation about Indiana or SMU this year that wasn't televised or on a podcast or a part of some sort of media thing. The only people talking about SMU and Indiana are people who were paid to do so. They are just not relevant factors for the sort of like mainline college football fans the way that you and I are. Tennessee, though, is different. Tennessee had a huge dud of a performance on Saturday, but the stakes felt so high. The Vols fans that showed up in the stadium in large numbers, the fact that now those same fans will be like beside themselves in anger, and everybody's sort of talking about what happens here and what where do you go from here? Like, even when an SEC team loses, the game just feels bigger. It just feels more meaningful because SEC fans, unlike some of the others, actually care and care enough in large enough numbers to make the game seem interesting, even when it isn't all that close. Now, speaking of Tennessee here for a moment, I may be the only one who feels this way, but I do sort of think this is a very interesting kind of off season coming up for Tennessee, because why does it seem like that we are treating Nico Iamaleava, the Tennessee quarterback, as carefully as we're treating him? And I thought, Nico was fine on Saturday, certainly played really, took a lot of hits and was willing to sort of keep running. Like, he never gave up, right? He kept fighting. But this is also year 2 for Nico, a quarterback we were told came to Tennessee for something like $8 gazillion worth of NIL or something like that. Like, is it at any point in time ever weird that he's not better than this? I'm talking about, there were lots of times on Saturday where he wasn't even really trying to throw it. It was obvious he was going to run. And he's a good athlete, good runner, long legs. He's a pretty good runner, and he certainly can take a hit, which is, to his credit. And I realize they don't have like Jalen Hyatt or that level of wide receiver in the program anymore. But once again, like, Nico is a major line item on the Tennessee salary cap. Is he supposed to be better than this? Is he ever going to be better than this? Next year's year 3. That's when, if he's, really good, you go to the NFL. And maybe he will be great next season. I'm not saying that he won't be. But there are a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC who are sort of vying to be great next season. Like, Nico's not the only one who's going to have the chance of sort of a big breakout performance. And in fact, right now, is Nico a better quarterback than Lenore Sellers is? I would say not. Nico's got a lot more fanfare around him. But didn't Sellers have the better overall season? And maybe it's a huge breakout for Nico next year, but like, Texas also thinks that Arch Manning's going to have one of those. And you can look all across the league where, a lot of programs sort of feel like, well, Florida would say that about DJ Lagway, that that the actual expectations that Tennessee has for Nico really are not all that different than other programs are going to have for their guy too. Like, it's just really weird for me that, Tennessee had better sort of end-of-season performance this year than we've kind of seen them have in a long time. But Nico wasn't really the reason why. I'm not a Nico hater. He's not significant enough right now for me to have much of a strong feeling one way or another. But I do think it's odd that a quarterback-friendly coach like Josh Heupel has such a high-profile quarterback, and the actual impact of Nico on the field this year was not really all that significant, but that doesn't seem to be all that hot of a topic around Tennessee here right now. I find that to be interesting, the investment made versus the results that they've gotten out of that so far. I'll also say this, and I don't like to toot my own horn. I really try to be as modest as possible. I think immodesty's gross. But we did tell you going into Friday on our last show that the thing that everybody be talking about today was going to be Ohio State. We said that Ohio State, we thought, out of that half of the bracket, would be the team that was going to play for the national championship. And I thought that Tennessee would play the game close. In fact, the only game we didn't pick correctly against the spread was I thought that Ohio State would look good in winning, but Tennessee would at least keep it close. That clearly didn't happen. We were 3-1 in our picks. Other than that, though, easily calling for the home teams to blow out in the other cases, and we were right. But in the case of Ohio State, this is one we just sort of saw coming, that the most undervalued team in this playoff, coming into the playoff, was Ohio State. The mistake that people, whether it be fans or media, the mistake that people make repeatedly is putting too much emphasis on the last thing they saw. You have to be really, really careful with that. And the last thing people saw from Ohio State was a game in which it played very badly against Michigan. And in the grand scheme of things, that's a data point. But it's only a single data point in comparison to all the other data that exists. Ohio State, from a talent perspective, is still very, very tough to deal with. And we spent most of the offseason talking about Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia and Ohio State, Georgia and Ohio State. We have said that it would sort of make a lot of sense for the season to conclude the exact same way the calendar year began, with a lot more talk about Georgia and Ohio State. So just remember, everybody's saying that now, but we were saying that on Friday. Honesty compels us to admit. One more thing here about all of this. So I think that you're going to put pressure on the committee for why these games were so bad. But let me give you at least a chance to consider this. Like, we saw 3 SEC teams make the playoff: Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee. Let's just look at Tennessee because they're the one that lost. Are we sure that Tennessee was the 3rd best team in the SEC? They're in the playoff because they beat Alabama, and that's the kind of win that gets you there, sort of. So from that standpoint, okay, well, they have that. But my point here is the pressure in the future might not be on the committee to make better choices because, frankly, they're just not capable of doing it much better than they're doing it right now. I just don't think they know enough about football. But the SEC might need to do a better job of actually separating its teams in the standings. That South Carolina and Ole Miss don't cross paths very much this year with Tennessee. What if they played on the field? What if there was some sort of, I don't know if you're like going to like SEC semifinals before a championship game or what you could do in the future, but some sort of way, whether maybe a 9-game conference schedule helps figure some of this kind of stuff out. That if you're going to get your 3 or 4 teams in the playoff, doing something to get those 3 and 4 teams in the playoff that are actually your 3 or 4 best teams, maybe that makes sense. And listen, maybe Tennessee was the 3rd best team in the SEC and they just got beat by a better team in Ohio State on Saturday night. That's certainly a possibility, but I couldn't help but wonder as you're watching Tennessee get dragged, I wonder if South Carolina would do better. I wonder if Ole Miss would do better. And should the SEC have done better at giving its actual best teams a chance to be in the playoff with so few of those teams playing each other this year? Something to consider, perhaps. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So I told you before that I am a little bit more confident in Georgia now than maybe I was a few days ago. And some of this is just sort of the natural progression towards the game. As the game gets closer, you get more excited. So some of that's just kind of natural and probably emotional and not something to pay attention to very much. But let me also give you this as we kind of start thinking about the game coming up against the Fighting Irish. One of the things we've been led to believe, the talent level for Georgia is not what it once was. Georgia's not as deep. the sport's more level, the playing field's more level. And maybe that's true. There is some evidence to suggest that it might be. But let me give you one thing, though, that maybe suggests that Georgia is as deep as ever, and deep in a way that no team, with perhaps the exception of Ohio State, can come close to matching here in this playoff. Have you been watching some of the transfer news as it relates to Georgia the last few days? Have you seen where, as we're hearing these announcements start to trickle out, where some of the transfers from Georgia are going? Did I see Jamal Jarrett? He's going to USC. Troy Bowles is going to Michigan. Justin Redd is going to Nebraska. Julian Humphreys going to A&M? Did Sam Mpemba? I guess some thought he might do that. I mean, or maybe it's official. All of these transfers, as we're hearing about these destinations, about where these guys are going, all of these players are all going to major programs. Michigan's the reigning national champion. USC is one of the sport's biggest brands. Texas A&M is a major factor in the SEC. Nebraska's got big-time NIL dollars. That's a Big Ten level program. I don't mean to disparage these Georgia players, but for the most part, these are players at Georgia that are leaving because they weren't playing very much. And I'm not trashing them. They may go on to be All-Americans at their new schools. The point here, though, is that for everybody who wants to say, well, the Georgia talent level is not quite what it once was. Boy, when you see players who aren't really playing very much finding very quick homes at places like USC, Michigan, Texas A&M, Nebraska, I think that sort of tells you what may be playing in front of these guys here at Georgia. And there have obviously been some reasons here this year why we've been called to question the overall Georgia talent level. A few games for Georgia this season that haven't gone very well. And if they're as talented as maybe they're supposed to be on paper, maybe they should have played better in those games. I don't dispute that. But is there a chance that a more rested version of Georgia gives the sort of talent that had these players displaced, that gives that a chance to kind of come on more full display? I'm curious about that. I have to admit that for all the talk about what the Georgia talent level no longer is, when you see kind of where guys who are leaving, where they're going, I think you're led to believe that Georgia still has collected a level of talent that almost nobody else in the sport can match. Before we wrap up, let me give a shout out to our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Obviously, if you've got kids like I do that are into all kinds of sports, things like that, you're spending a lot of time at a place like Academy during the Christmas season. And if you're getting ready for tailgate for the Sugar Bowl, all that kind of stuff, they got really great stuff there for you on that. So whether you need a new basketball hoop for your driveway, or you want a fire pit for your backyard, or the tailgate supplies, or anything else, all kinds of fun happening out there. And our friends from Academy Sports and Outdoors want you to get out there and be able to enjoy it. They are the official sporting goods and outdoor retailer of the SEC. So make sure you check out Academy Sports and Outdoors, your destination this holiday season to support the red and black. You want to look good in that Georgia gear, you can go buy plenty of it right now, your local Academy Sports and Outdoors. So get stocked up for Christmas, stocked up for the Sugar Bowl, and stocked up for all the sports you're going to have going on in your life in the brand new year, all online at academy.com. That's academy.com for a lot more on that today. Couple of notes tonight, as always. It's On the Beat with Mike Griffith, our buddy Jay Black, pinch hitting for Cody Chavins on that tonight. You'll love that. Also, special edition of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger here tonight. There, too. Jeff and Kaylee have their end-of-year awards. That's going to be a lot of fun. You will love all that. Can I also take some time to give a shout-out to Georgia basketball? Another pre-conference win for them last night against Charleston Southern. This team is really, really good. They are really good. And I can't wait for the SEC run, especially when it comes to what they're doing in the front court right now. Big men up front going to be really, really tough on one of these SEC teams. Shout out to Georgia basketball. Another nice win for them. Let's also give you a couple of golden shoes here for a moment. As you might imagine, Christmas themed. Our buddy Matt Rukavina writing in here a joke that he's used before. He says, BA, is this too soon? You see, I'll be home for Christmas, but instead of Santa Claus, it's the Tennessee Tea. Yeah, those Vols are going to be home for Christmas here. Not a lot of postseason left for them to enjoy after getting embarrassed by Ohio State. So very funny from Matt Rukavina. And we'll give a golden shoe as well to our buddy Barkalot here, who's always so talented. Sugar Bowl bound. You see Uga as Santa Claus. I love that. The Georgia-themed reindeer. Robin saying, rest up and get ready for Nolans, the Sugar Bowl. And Georgia, go Dogs. Hashtag beat Notre Dame. By the way, Elon doesn't want us using hashtags anymore, but nonetheless, that still looks pretty good to me. And the hashtag #GoDawg still looks very good because you see the Power G showing up. So we'll give Robin Barkalot a golden shoe there for that. So very, very Merry Christmas to all of you. How about those lousy, stinking Gators? They get nothing but coal in their stocking. It's been 1,507 days, 1,507 since Florida's beaten Georgia. We love that. It's our Gator Hater Updater. So y'all don't forget, we are off for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. We'll be off as well on the 26th, but back on Friday, big show rolling into wall-to-wall Sugar Bowl coverage. So take some time with friends and family. Enjoy your Christmas. We'll see you on the 26th, and we're going to get after it right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them and all that today. I was thinking about our golden shoes earlier, kind of Christmas-themed shoes, Christmas shoes, and I started realizing I hadn't heard Christmas shoes in a long time. Is Christmas shoes over? Y'all know that song, right? Jay Black says he hopes so. It's one of those things that's not a good song, but if it really is out, like never, if it no longer exists in our nomenclature for the season, a little sad about that, right? Terrible song. I mean, just terrible song. But still, like, is it? If it's no longer being played, I guess that's a little bit sad. Do people still like Christmas shoes? I feel like that's one of those things that, like, if it does go away, in a few years, it's going to come back. Someone's going to discover it. They're going to put it on, like, X or Instagram or TikTok or something. And everybody's going to be, like, shocked that this song was ever popular to begin with. But when I was thinking about the Christmas shoes, I was sort of thinking, wait, is Christmas shoes still around? Is that over? DMart42 says one of the biggest takeaways he saw was that Notre Dame's nose man, just 295 pounds. He says, we're going to eat on the ground. Maybe so. And I get the point that you're making. Here's the one thing about Notre Dame, though. And in the sort of never-ending sort of debate of, well, this time they're for real. And no, they're not. They're always overrated. Just one thing to keep in mind about Notre Dame. Week 1, go on the road to Texas A&M and won by 10 points. So I'm not telling you that. I mean, A&M was only 8-4. I'm not telling you that's the greatest win ever. But it's a real that's a real win against a real SEC level team, on the road. If you watch that game that day, it was an incredibly hostile environment. And Notre Dame just went in there and won, not by a million points, but they also won. I mean, a double-digit win on the road in a situation like that. That's a convincing win. So I think, listen, I would love nothing more to be great for my brand, my personal brand, to be on here like, this Notre Dame team thinks it's going to come down south and beat the SEC. Like, that would be so good for me if I could do that. There's a little part of my brain that just can't quite get there. And I'm not telling you I think that Georgia's going to lose or anything like that. But this sort of feels like a year, unlike, say, 2022, when we were obnoxiously confident. This just sort of feels like a year to not quite do that. And if Georgia really is the best team, then let them go out there and prove it. Something about this sort of feels like, I'm not quite so sure I want to, like, slam my fist on the table and talk about how bad Georgia's about to beat everybody and, how wrong they're about to prove, Doofus on CBS or anything like that. Something about that, about this season makes me want to just sort of stop short of that a bit. Keith Ritchie says that Tennessee didn't look like it wanted it compared to Ohio State. I meant to ask John about this. We just didn't have time. There's so much going on. It's just hard to do the show inside of 2 hours as it is. But with all the Tennessee injuries on Saturday, was that weather related? Like, they kept losing guys. Were they just getting cold? I mean, Sampson's hamstring, things like that. Like, how much of that was just things hurt worse when it's cold? I did kind of wonder about that. By the way, Kenneth Herron, in the absence of my, obnoxious confidence, he says, listen, Dogs by Fitty. So there you go. So there'll be plenty of Georgia fans to fill the void if I'm not sounding confident enough. Brandon Griffin the same way says he's got Georgia 37-17. He says just too much talent overall. And listen, maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case. I do kind of agree with what I said to John, kind of thinking through this of, Georgia's barely favored to win this game. They're not favored to win the national championship. They're among the favorites, but they're not the top favorite. They're not undefeated, number one ranked team, for instance. Maybe this is a year. By the way, happy birthday to Kirby Smart too. Maybe this is a year where you just go out there and just let it rip. Just go out there and swing for the fences. Jamie Huff giving a good morning to folks. Appreciate that. Neil Calvino says, when it's cold in my bones, it's over. Yeah. Neil living out in California, she's not used to that cold weather either. But I kind of wondered, is just Tennessee just having a hard time with the cold? Doug Rayburn says, if we can stay away from the big plays, we can blow them out. Take away the 98-yard run, and their average was less than 2 yards per carry. That is true, and we've had other people mention that too. And, maybe it will be that. Maybe it will be that easy. Maybe it will be. The thing that I gave you before, hey, I'm a little bit, my confidence growing. One of the things that does cause my confidence to also grow is, it seems like Trevor Etienne's healthy now. That's good. Roderick Robinson maybe working his way back. Georgia playing behind an offensive line that's maybe also playing its best football may be healthier at the running back position than it's been. Another reason perhaps to be confident. Wendell Brewer says Notre Dame wants to be Georgia when they grow up. It's that simple. So there you go. Neil Calvino pointing out that we're going late today, pack show. Yeah, we're trying to. Just putting the playoff and the fact this is the last time we'll speak live for a couple of days. We're trying to get it all in. Philip Jordan Wells is always very funny in here. Travis McCullough says, take that run game away from Notre Dame and watch what happens. That's true. I guess the other thing that I sort of think about a little bit is Georgia's obviously had its issues with running quarterbacks. Riley Leonard's pretty good at that. I don't know. Like, I want to get to where some of y'all are. I'm having a hard time getting there, though. I'm not obviously thinking they're going to lose or anything like that, but in 2022, like, I give you a few games for me. The Michigan game in 2021. There's nothing that feels better for me than when your team is about to go play a game and you're sure they are going to win and you're sure they're in good shape. And I was very, very confident ahead of that game against Michigan and said so in the air plenty. And that's, by the way, at a time in which a lot of people were not all that excited about Georgia, a little bit like the Ohio State thing. People have a tendency to fixate on the last thing they saw. And, part of the reason that we do pretty well with our picks is we sort of fight against that one temptation to make too big of a deal out of the last thing that happened. We try to avoid that temptation, and then after that, there's a lot more clarity about what will happen. So we were very confident going into the game against Michigan in the Orange Bowl that year. Felt very good to see that validated. We spent the 2022 season very confident about all those games. Tennessee game, obviously the primary example of that, felt very good to have that validated. Like, it feels really good as a fan when a lot of people think your team's not going to win, but you're sure they are, and then they go out and do. That just feels really good. It's like you don't have to bet money on the game to have that feel good. Just the sheer personal satisfaction of, I saw this coming, just feels really good. And there have been a few big games for Georgia that, man, we can say, I saw that coming. I am not going to be telling you about, in this particular year, in this particular instance, I'm not going to do a whole lot of I saw that coming because I really don't quite know what to expect. But I do believe that Georgia can win the national championship. David Andrews says he thinks that Georgia's going to have to play its best game of the year to win this one. I think, if you watch Ohio State on Saturday, they played a better game they'd played all year long. And by the way, they did the same thing to Georgia in 2022, too. Now, Georgia won that game. But, as someone who loves college football, watching Ohio State that night against Georgia, I'm sitting there thinking, where has this been all year long? And frankly, Ohio State fans were like, why are we doing this now when we haven't been doing it all year? C.J. Stroud was running all over the place and everything. That was such a nightmare. It's like you got the receivers, but you also got this quarterback all of a sudden now wants to be a running quarterback. It's like, what in the world is going on? So I do think that's a little bit of a template for Georgia of, hey, against good teams for the most part this year, Georgia's had its best moments against good teams. So find that level now. It's almost like a fresh, brand new start to the season. Georgia gets a layoff that's long enough to make you sort of feel that way. So hopefully you take advantage of it. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Garrison Tucker says Texas is a far superior team than Notre Dame. We're going to control the clock with ground game. The defense will smother the Notre Dame offense. Perhaps that's the case. Garrison Tucker also says Georgia needs to run the Northern Illinois playbook. Obviously, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. I will tell you, though, I don't judge teams at their worst. I do judge them at their best. But I know the point you're making. I get the point you're making. So UGA Marine says they need to go ahead and slap Notre Dame around to kind of get in the head of either Penn State or Boise State. So here's what I believe is true. Let's take Boise out of it for a moment. I believe that Notre Dame is probably better than Penn State based on what I think that I know. That's what I believe. I believe that Notre Dame is probably better. Oh, by the way, Shane Holiday, getting back from a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, says that he good call on the Mason Jar. I'm glad to hear that, Shane. That's awesome. So Mason Jar, Southern-themed restaurant, have like a bourbon bar, country band. They play late at night. It's fun, man. It's really fun. Shane, I'm glad you had a good time with that. That's awesome to hear. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Dennis B. on those Tennessee fans that go up there and spend a bunch of money to watch their team lose. I'm telling you, man, that's got to be tough. It's like, they try to be like Georgia, who went over and took over Notre Dame Stadium in 2017, but Georgia won that game. And so that started a great run for Georgia. It's also interesting to see, obviously wasn't there, and I'd be the first to tell you that video can be misleading. But the video I saw made it look like there were a lot of Tennessee fans there. And, the TV broadcast to begin the game was making mention of it. You don't normally make mention of the opposing fans at the beginning of a TV broadcast unless you think it's going to be a noticeable factor in the game. There's a sort of a science to all this, or not science, but a protocol to this. Early in the broadcast, you mention things that you think are going to be important for the broadcast. So it seemed real. The Tennessee takeover, the best that I can tell, seemed real. But you've got prominent figures on Ohio State, Ross Bjork, and the wide receivers coach Brian Hartline. They're saying that it didn't happen, that it wasn't real, which I don't know why they care. If they won the game, that's the only thing that should matter, it seems like. But the best that I can tell, there was. Tennessee played off on the field, but the presence of the Vols fans in the stands, that was real, right? Every time I saw a shot on TV, there's orange everywhere, which, by the way, I thought for the Penn State SMU game, I thought they were very creative about how they were shooting those shots. If there were empty seats in State College, you didn't see a lot of those. And I'm led to believe there were, but they didn't really show them on camera very much. I felt like I did see a decent number of empties in Austin, though. That's so strange to me. So strange. Good weather, big game, home playoff game. I'd love to hear from somebody in Austin about why that didn't sort of feel like a bigger deal there. Crowd was loud, I guess it was loud enough, I guess. But so BMAC said he heard it was between 20 and 40,000. So I'm guessing it wasn't 40. 40 is about what Georgia had against Notre Dame. It would take at least 20 to be noticeable on TV, because if it's less than that, you're going to have large pockets in the stadium. There's not many Tennessee fans at all. So I would say that based on my assumption as somebody who goes to a lot of games and just sort of observes this stuff, that it probably wasn't 40, but it also probably was more than 20. I mean, there were people before the game, they were saying they were in the early part of the stadium, like people around the Ohio State program were saying there were more Tennessee fans in the stadium than there were Buckeyes fans. DT says that Penn State had a bunch of empty seats high in the end zone. Yeah, that's sort of what I thought. And they kind of have the camera angle. You didn't see that. But, I mean, at Texas, I was seeing from their camera angles, you know, especially in the end zone, I was seeing a decent number of empty seats. Let me go back to Facebook for a moment. Brandon Griffin says he doesn't think that Ohio State makes it past Texas. That'll be a home game base for Texas. Their fans are already buying up those tickets since Arizona State will be just a warm-up. Maybe so, but take Georgia out of it. What's the best unit in the playoff? Take Georgia out of it. What's the best unit in the playoff? I believe the best unit in the play, and by the way, we said this Friday. We said this before the game against Tennessee. So we may end up being wrong, but this is not a knee-jerk reaction for us. We said this coming into the weekend. I think the best unit in the playoffs is the Ohio State defense. I do. And now you have a situation on Saturday where it's like, you know, Jeremiah Smith played as advertised. If you'll remember, going into the game against Oregon, one of the predictions I got wrong was I thought Ohio State was going to win that game. We also said that we thought that leaving that game, Jeremiah Smith would enter the Heisman Trophy conversation. Now, Smith did not have that kind of game against Oregon, but he kind of did against Tennessee, the sort of wow factor type game. Will Howard, who I do not find to be an impressive quarterback, made some really big throws too. So you gravitate towards the offense because just people naturally do, and the Ohio State offense played really well against Tennessee. But the thing that I think the Buckeyes have going for them, the reason why I believe they beat Oregon, and I would predict them to beat Texas too, is I think the Buckeyes defense is good. I do. I think it's the best unit in the playoff of sort of the non-Georgia category. Good to see Kathy Aquaviva checking in here today. She says she also doesn't think Ohio State's going to beat Texas unless Ohio State plays another game like this past Saturday. That version of Ohio State's very, very hard to beat. Yeah. They really activated those very good wide receivers in a way that maybe at times this year they haven't always done. Al Chandler says in the first round, the teams that couldn't run the ball lost. Check the stats. Perhaps that's the case. Kathy also says the Ohio State defense was SEC level good, scary good. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the one thing. It's like I'm obviously the biggest SEC homer in the world, but I would also acknowledge that for the most part, Ohio State builds its roster very similar to how SEC teams, the best ones, are built. So I think Kathy's right about that. Jeff Ingram says the question is, can Day get the same performance 2 games in a row, which is certainly very fair. Certainly fair. Dean Butler says he also thinks that Ohio State's the second best team. D-Mart says that Ryan Day reminds him of Kalen DeBoer, who had his team ready to beat us and also blow out LSU, but immediately followed up with losses to Vanderbilt and Ohio State. Not Ohio State. He says that's coaching more than talent. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't dispute that Day has got a spotlight on him. I don't dispute that. I guess the one thing that I'll say about Day, and obviously we make fun of him plenty, but go back to that Peach Bowl in 2022. Georgia won the game, but Day had that team ready to play that day. He did. So, I'm not a huge Ryan Day guy, but, I mean, just from our own personal perspective, we have seen him get his teams ready to play. Now, if you want to say, hey, it's not going to hold up for them over the course of, a long season, it's a fair point. I mean, that half of the bracket's fun, and maybe it's to Georgia's advantage to not be on that side. Doghouse Lawn Care says Dawg is going to clean up this mess of the SEC. It just means more. 2017 DawgNation invasion to South Bend was a takeover. Vols to the shoe was embarrassing. Indeed, that is the case for Doghouse. You're right about that, for sure. Adam J. says, do you think that Glenn Schumann will be at Georgia next season? I do believe that Schumann is ready for kind of his sort of next stop, which for him will be a head coach. I'm led to believe that he also came pretty close to getting that Eagles defensive coordinator job too. Ultimately, I guess, deciding to stay at Georgia. So I think that Schumann is probably ready for what's next. But when you look at the head coaching ranks here right now, I don't know that there's another job that's likely to come open that Schumann would leave for. For instance, of course, if you had a chance to take the North Carolina job, I believe that you would. And frankly, I think that UNC would have been far better off with Schumann as head coach than Bill Belichick. But you would take the North Carolina job. Pretty good resources, decent talent in state, close enough to like South Carolina and Georgia that you can also kind of get in there and recruit those states too. North Carolina has a pretty good job. And in the next couple of years, there's either probably not going to be an ACC or there's a very good chance that North Carolina won't be in it. So the job may even get better as you start looking ahead to future years. But the other job that recently came open in Wake Forest, you never heard Schumann connected to Wake Forest. I don't believe that Glenn Schumann would have left Georgia for the Wake Forest job. I don't think he would have. Would he have left Georgia for North Carolina? Probably so, and he probably should. So I think that Schumann's ready to be a head coach. It's just a matter of we haven't seen a ton of firings this year for whatever reason. I think some of that's probably due to the fact that given the fact that players are about to get paid so much from the house settlement, whatnot, I don't think teams want to also pay buyouts too. So we kind of see a lot of sort of like coaches ready for their next move that it's just there's just not a place for them to go right now. So I believe Schumann's probably in his mind ready to be a head coach. I don't know that there's a job there for him right now. Have we heard anything about the Marshall head coaching job yet? Not for Schumann, but I'd have my eye on the Marshall job a little bit. That's not a Schumann level job, but I'd be kind of curious about that Marshall coaching job. Do we have information on that job right now? Obviously, Charles Huff leaves it to go to Southern Miss. I would maybe watch Marshall a little bit. Jonathan Ayers asking about the flag planting thing in Ohio. Yeah, stuff like that's dumb. I mean, politicians of both stripes are always going to do dumb stuff when it relates to sports and college football. Anytime they have a chance to sort of get their name in the news for being like what they think is in favor of the hometown team, they're going to do it. A lot of times end up being kind of dumb because most politicians are not very big sports fans. Some of them are legitimately fans. Some of them are not. So a lot of politicians do dumb stuff when it relates to sports. And I'd say this is probably an example of that. Dean Butler asks, who's our next star coordinator after Schumann? It's a good question. I really don't know who it would be. That's a good question. But I believe soon enough, maybe finding that out. Kenneth Holt asked about West Virginia. Yeah, West Virginia rehired Rich Rodriguez. Rodriguez was there. He was head coach when they beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl in 2005. And then, was rumored to take the Alabama job and then I guess changed his mind about that. Eventually did take the Michigan job. And then that didn't work. Ended up at Arizona. That didn't work. Ended up at Jacksonville State. And that was pretty good. He's been an offensive coordinator various places. And so it's kind of a weird career trajectory for Rodriguez. But the alumnus of West Virginia is now back there. And that may be an okay spot for him. Keith Ritchie, the subject of tight ends and running backs. Y'all, Georgia's tight ends right now I think are playing really, really well. Oscar Delp is playing amazing right now. And that's one of the things about the playoff I'm almost the most excited for. All right, it's already late. Let's run through as many comments as we can kind of quick here because this will be the last time we do this for a little while. William Rozier says, is it Rozier or is it Rozier, like the former running back, William? He says, I'm very worried about Georgia's passing game with no Beck. We never felt out of it with Beck. Stockton has a different skill set. That's kind of true, although I will say the most underrated thing about Gunnar Stockton is he can throw the ball over the mountains. What's the line from Napoleon Dynamite? Gunnar Stockton can throw it 10 miles. I don't think people realize that about him. He has a little bit of a weird throwing motion in the eyes of some people. He's less experienced, and I do believe that matters. But I also said this a moment ago, hey, maybe Georgia sort of sees this as kind of a pressure-off playoff where, like, not that many people are really picking Georgia to win the national championship. People think they're going to lose eventually. Some people do anyway. Why not just let it rip? And, maybe there's a chance that Georgia's, as we kind of touched on during the show, using the fake punt as an example, maybe there's a chance that Georgia to change momentum, to provide a spark, maybe they do some stuff they haven't been doing all season long. Jaron Lopez says that Gunner's going to be ready for war just like every other dog, so I like that from Jaron. Passer Bye-Bye says the script against Notre Dame is heavy run, lots of tight end and action, defense, no turnovers, long drives. Anything less than we'll get blown out. Yeah, I don't see Georgia getting blown out, but I do think Georgia could lose. I do think they could lose. I don't think they will, but I believe they could. Here's what I will say. I'm a very big fan of Gunnar Stockton, very big believer in Gunnar Stockton. I think that Gunnar has a chance to be a great quarterback for Georgia next season. I do believe they need to throw it more effectively than they did against Texas. I think he was 16 completions for 74 yards. Probably need to be better than that in the college football playoff. Alex Waller says it does seem odd that a lot of us are not sure if Gunnar is a good passer when he broke the Georgia high school records. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And listen, I think that I don't expect him to throw it as well as Carson Beck would, but I also wouldn't put it past Georgia to kind of put the sort of game plan together that gives him a chance to have some nice moments. D-Mart says, I'm the playoff Grinch. Yeah, I'm really trying not to be. Y'all know. I mean, look, Georgia's got every chance in the world to win this game. For some reason, I don't want to be, even though it'd be good for, like, audience engagement, I don't want to be Georgia better go out there and blow this team out. By the time we get to New Year's Eve, somewhere on Bourbon Street, I'm probably saying that to somebody. Just to be honest, the closer you get to the game, the more those sort of natural feelings will eventually start to come out here a little bit. But for right now, I don't necessarily want to do that, even though I believe that Georgia is going to win this game, going to play for the national championship. And against Ohio State, I would think that Georgia would have, who I assume will be on the other side, I think that Georgia will have a pretty good chance of winning. But if I'm really, really confident, because y'all remember, we began the season by saying that Georgia was going to beat Clemson by 30 points. Like, we predicted that on the air. We got it right. So if I come on here and make a very bold prediction, especially one that Georgia fans would be likely to like, if I come with a lot of confidence about a very positive outcome for Georgia, I don't want to just be blowing smoke. I really, really don't. So if I'm hesitant, it's about respect for the audience, really. I don't want to, like, be a phony or a fake to any of you. Keith Rich on the subject of Stockton having a little bit of a long delivery. That might kind of be true. But the truth is, Quinn Ewers got kind of a long delivery. I mean, Gunner's got a little bit of a wind up. I don't dispute that. Kenneth Holt mentioning Notre Dame bringing in safeties, expecting Gunner to run. I think how Gunner runs is going to matter too. Like, the one thing that Stetson really had was the kind of lateral quickness that made him really tough to deal with in short, like, small spaces. I think that Gunner's a little bit of a different kind of runner. Probably not, if I'm guessing, as much straight line speed as Stetson has. So how Gunner runs is also going to matter to me. Let's do a couple more and we're going to go because it is crazy late. Savannah Bryan asked a really good question. A really good question. This is a very, very good question. He says, what happened to the point I've made a million times, which is that Georgia does not lose non-conference games. Georgia has not lost a non-conference game since 2018. And non-conference games against ranked opponents, not only do they win them, they blow them out. Clemson this year, Florida State last year, TCU 2022, Michigan 2021, Oregon to begin the season. That Georgia's last, let's say, 7 or 8 games against ranked non-conference opponents, they won all those games by 30-plus points. So if now that you have like the Ohio State game, which was close, the Clemson game in 2021 was close, but I mean Georgia's non-conference record is sterling, and a huge number of those games were like ranked, away from home, neutral site in many cases. It is a point, and Brian will eventually get there this week as we get closer to the game. It's a point that I do take some comfort in. I'm just trying to decide if this is still the same Georgia enough to be able to get that done. And very possibly it is. Very possibly it is. And in fact, it may be proven emphatically true against the Irish, and Georgia may roll after that. But if you want to kind of lean on where we've been confident before, it's in these spots, in these games. When you play well enough in the SEC that you earn your right to play an elimination game against a non-SEC team, that typically goes pretty well for Georgia. But as I started the show today by saying, how much has the sport changed? Is that version of the sport still true, where Georgia just sort of overwhelms the non-SEC level team? It's a great question, though, Brian, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's certainly what we've talked about before. UGA Marine also brings up a really good point. So he says when it comes to like jobs and things like that, he says you got to be careful turning down jobs. You might pass up the job you need, waiting on the job you want that never comes calling. I'll give you an example of this from sports, and we got to get ready to go after this. I feel like that's a different sport, but to me that's a little bit what Jeff Francoeur did, where Francoeur were led to believe when he was still, kind of in the early days of his sort of rookie deals, major leaguer, you got a pre-arbitration long-term contract. You turned it down thinking you could get more money. But the truth is, the on-field product didn't quite turn out to be what it's supposed to be, and he really never got a chance to make that money again. He still played for a long time and made good money and making good money as a broadcaster now, and someone who I am genuinely a fan of. But that's probably an example of turning down a contract that you never got that contract again. So for the most part, I would say that if you get offered a Power 4 coaching job, for the most part, you should take it. I do believe, though, the current landscape of the sport is making a place like Wake Forest virtually impossible to win at. When there was a chance that Dan Lanning might get the Kansas job, I said about that, as Marine said, if you get a chance to take that job, you should take it, because they're going to pay you probably $4 million a year. $3 million at least. Even if it's a failure, that's still money you'll never make somewhere else if you don't take that job. I don't view the Wake Forest job, because of the House settlement and the current landscape, I don't view the Wake Forest job the same way. But it's a fair point. Zach Adams pointing out Georgia's history of having backup quarterbacks come in and play well. You got a lot of examples of that. Gary Holt and David Mathis talking about the fact that I say a lot that I get things wrong. And I do try to listen. Here's what I love. I love making predictions about college football. I do. And I love making them the full knowledge that sometimes you get them right, and it feels really good. Sometimes you get them wrong, and that's sort of to be expected. And that having some sort of prediction about what we're about to see kind of helps us, I think, appreciate what we do see. And so I do enjoy all of that. And so as we get ready for next week, we'll do a lot more of that. But we have got to go for now. So no show for us on Christmas Eve, no show on Christmas Day. We're also going to take off the 26th. So the next 3 days, we're going to be with family and friends. We're going to enjoy Christmas. I hope you're all going to do the same thing. But on Friday, let's get game faces on. Let's get ready to go. big, big run all the way to New Orleans through the Sugar Bowl, and hopefully a lot more college football playoff after that. So let's have some fun with that. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all that today. Have a great Christmas, everybody. Enjoy the week. And then we'll see you back here Friday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.